When I first read that Google DeepMind was hiring a philosopher, I was thinking about it for a while. Because something felt off. Not exactly wrong, just incomplete. Like a question that had been answered before it was fully asked. And it took me a day to realize what was missing. Right now there's a serious conversation happening in AI labs, in philosophy departments, and in tech journalism. But all this discussion is missing something essential. It's not about having a better argument or a smarter researcher. I think it's a different kind of question entirely. A few months ago, Google DeepMind hired Cambridge philosopher Henry Shevlin to work on machine consciousness. And then the usual debate followed. Is that really progress or is it sophisticated PR? Well, I'm not so much interested in that debate. What's more interesting to me is the question almost no one asks. Which philosophy do they want to apply? Because that single choice, which tradition, which tools, which understanding of what a human being actually is, changes everything about what AI development sees and doesn't see. Today I want to show you how I know that. Not from theory, but from sitting across from real people whose lives made it impossible to ignore. But before we go deeper, let me say where I'm coming from. I'm not an academic. I didn't study philosophy at the university. But for 25 years, I studied that as a personal preoccupation. Not only by reading books, but also during long runs, in meditations, and in the kind of quiet thinking that happens when you stay with hard questions long enough. And for much of that time, I worked alongside professionals in corporate tech environments. Men and women in the 40s and 50s, technically excellent and outwardly successful. Over the last few years, I have mentored more than 30 of them through AI-disrupted career transitions. And what strikes me most is not their fear of being replaced by machines. Instead, it's something quieter and older. It's the slow recognition that they've spent 20 or more years being treated as a resource. About 2 years ago, I sat with a senior manager, 52 years old, and for 23 years in the same company. He had given everything to an institution that had just told him his role was being restructured because of automation. He wasn't angry. He was confused in a way that went far deeper than the job or the money. He said to me, I have given everything to this place. And I realized now they never actually saw me. And at that point, I had remembered the concept of Heidegger. Because what the manager described, being treated as something measurable and deployable, rather than someone with a real interiority. That's something Heidegger had named precisely in 1954, long before the first commercial computer. And Heidegger called it the Gestell, the enframing. I realized I had understood the word intellectually without ever truly knowing what it meant. That gap is what I want to explore today. Not as an abstract philosophy, but as something happening to real people right now in the human essence in the AI age. So Heidegger's argument in the question concerning technology is not that machines might malfunction or be misused. It's much more unsettling. He says that modern technology changes how everything, including the people, show up in the world. And under the inframing, everything becomes Bestand, the standing reserve. The resources waiting to be ordered, optimized and deployed. Not beings with interiority, but instruments with useful properties. And what makes this more than academic is that Gestell, the enframing, is not something technology does to us from the outside. It's more a way of seeing we absorb. We begin to see ourselves the same way, measured by outputs, by efficiency, and by what we produce for the system. The man I sat with had lived that for 23 years. When the institution no longer needed his particular configuration of skills, he had no framework left for his own value. And that's not a career problem. It is an ontological one. The point is it remains completely invisible to the analytic philosophy of mind tradition that Henry Shevlin works in. Because analytic philosophy asks, what properties does this system have? It does not ask, what does it mean to a being for whom existence itself is at stake? That second question belongs to Heidegger. And it is the one that matters most for protecting human essence in the AI age. So once I saw Gestell clearly, I began to notice the deeper structure beneath it. Gestell is a symptom of the forgetting of being. A way of thinking that strips away everything that cannot be measured. And when DeepMind asks whether an A system is conscious, they are already working inside a particular framework. They're checking properties and criteria. What they are not asking is, what kind of being does consciousness emerge from? Heidegger's answer is Dasein, which means being in the world. Because consciousness is not a property like processing speed. It emerges from being embedded, embodied, and mortal. You're thrown into a world you did not choose. And guess what? Heidegger has also a name for that. He calls it Geworfenheit. You did not choose your body or your historical moment or the particular losses that shaped you. A machine has no thrownness. It has only training history. It has no Sorge, no worries, which is ultimately the fundamental care and concern about its own existence. And it also has no anxiety about its own non-being. That difference is structural. No amount of better training data closes it. Now, there is a third idea of Heidegger that is actually the hardest to formalize. That's exactly why it keeps getting left out. He calls it dwelling. And to dwell is not to occupy space or process information about an environment. It means to be genuinely at home in the world. To have a relationship with place, with time, with things that are irreducibly yours. Think of the particular quality of light in a city you have lived in for 20 years. You cannot fully describe it, yet you recognize it instantly. Or the weight of a specific year in your body, let's say 2008 or 2020. Not just as data in memory, but as a real feeling. Or the way a room changes when someone you love has just left it. A presence in the absence. These are not retrievable data points. They are the texture of a life lived by someone who will one day not be here. AI systems do not dwell. They process. A machine can describe grief with precision, but has never grieved. It can generate a poem about loss that moves you. Yet it has never lost anything. This dwelling gap is perhaps the most important and least visible part when we ask what philosophy is missing from the AI consciousness debate. Analytic philosophy of mind can model information processing with great sophistication. It cannot model dwelling. Now, Heidegger shows us what kind of being is at stake and what gets lost when everything becomes standing reserve. But there is a further question he does not fully answer. What do we do with that being? That leads us into Nietzsche's territory. The real risk Nietzsche would name today is not that machines might be mistaken for conscious beings. It's the other way around. It is that human beings might stop living like ones. So Heidegger maps the territory. Nietzsche asks what you do once you're standing in it. Nietzsche's will to power is often misunderstood, but in the end it has nothing to do with domination over others. More than that, it's the fundamental drive towards self-overcoming, the impulse to become more than you currently are. A machine can optimize strategy to become better with perfect precision, but what it cannot do is experience the act of self-overcoming. And that's the choice to continue, not because the data supports it, but because something in you refuses to be less than you're capable of. Any AI system operates within a value framework it was given. It cannot create new values. It cannot overcome itself. And that capacity to exceed the given frame is one of the most distinctly human things there is. And Nietzsche's Zarathustra speaks of the higher human being who creates values. He doesn't inherit or discover them, but actually creates them. The revaluation of all values. I've watched this with one of the professionals I mentored. It was a woman who had spent 15 years optimizing for a definition of success she had absorbed from her industry without ever truly choosing it. And when that framework collapsed, she didn't look for a new one. She built one. For the first time, she decided what actually mattered to her, not what the industry valued, not what her CV had been optimized toward, but what she could truly stand behind. She told me later it was the most disorienting and the most alive she had felt in years. That's not just a career pivot. That is a Nietzschean act. Again, AI systems optimize within given values. They cannot create them. They can suggest the most efficient path to a goal. They cannot tell you which goals are worth having. That's a structural limitation, not a technical. Now, Nietzsche's most demanding thought is Amor Fati. It's the love of fate. It's not passive acceptance, but active affirmation of your entire existence, including the suffering, the losses, and the things that can't be undone. And this is only possible for a being that has a fate. A particular life with particular failures and moments of grace. AI doesn't have fate. It has a draining history. It cannot laugh its fate because it has no relationship to its own existence as something that truly matters. The idea usually lands hardest for the midlife professionals I work with. Because when a career is disrupted and identity destabilized, the response is not another optimization framework. It is the capacity to look at your particular life, including the years given to an institution that saw you as a standing reserve, and affirm it anyway. Not despite the difficulty, but through it. There's one more thing that's worth naming. The tech world's relationship to philosophy has a shadow. It welcomes the parts of philosophy that might validate or advance what it is already doing. It is less comfortable with the philosophy that interrogates the values already embedded in its systems. The philosophy that asks who benefits when people are treated as standing reserve. But naming that shadow is part of what philosophy is for. Now let me return to the room and that man who realized the institution had never actually seen him. What he needed was not a better career strategy. He needed a framework that could hold the full weight of what had happened without reducing it to a skills gap or market shift. Heidegger gave him language for something he already knew in his body. Continental philosophy does what analytic philosophy of mind cannot. It asks what it means to be a being for whom existence itself is at stake. What it means to resist being reduced to standing reserve. What it means to dwell. To live a life that is truly and irreducibly yours. DeepMind hired a serious philosopher for a real question. But the tradition they brought into the room cannot ask these questions. The tradition that can is still not in the room. And that's not a small gap. It is a civilizational one for human essence in the AI age. Here is what I want you to sit with this week. Think about one area of your professional life where you have been functioning as standing reserve. Measurable, optimizable, deployable, but not truly seen. And then ask yourself, what would it mean to show up there as a being with real interiority? Not as a performance of depth, but as the actual thing. Only you can live that answer. A machine can simulate it, but you have to embody it. If this opens something you want to keep exploring, there's a link in the description to our career archetype test. It is a short assessment, about 10 minutes, that helps you identify which psychological pattern is most active in how you're navigating this moment. This is the right next step if this video raised more questions than it answered. And if a particular idea landed differently than you expected, leave it in the comments. I'm curious on each of them, and those conversations often shape the next piece.